Bernie Sanders delivered his speech on democratic socialism, and the whole point was to clarify any misconceptions or myths about what democratic socialism is. And he specifically brought up our current system, which is essentially corporate socialism. Now, in response, we've seen quite a few headlines that are mocking him, minimizing the relevance or the significance of what he had to say. And so I want to share some of those headlines with you. The first one is actually a straight news article, or at least it's not supposed to be an opinion piece. As Bernie Sanders leans into socialism, his rivals laugh.
So we're gonna pick that article apart in a second. It's the worst reporter in the country who wrote that.
Okay, so we'll get to that. But now I'm gonna give you some op-eds, and then I'm gonna give you a headline that I thought was actually pretty good, and I wanna give Politico credit for this headline. But first, here's the op-ed headline from The Atlantic. Sanders' speech about socialism was deeply unserious.
Preposterous. So by the way, The Atlantic is getting into this game now. They're like, oh, Washington Post, 16 negative articles about Bernie Sanders in 24 hours in 2016. When he launched this time around, Washington Post had 4 articles about Bernie Sanders, all negative. Atlantic's like, hold my beer. Okay, we'll do even crazier articles against Bernie Sanders. I don't know if these things are on fire in Washington. Maybe they get so many clicks inside the Beltway. Or people are like, oh yeah, you're making fun of Bernie Sanders. Yes, 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 yes.
So Wall Street Journal, as I would expect, they tend to have pretty right-wing op-ed writers, published an op-ed with the title, The Marx Brother. And then I gotta give Politico credit. I was shocked to find that they had a positive headline, and this was not an op-ed piece. Sanders goes full FDR in defense of democratic socialism.
And that was the point of the speech. That is an accurate title.
Yes.
Look, we often criticize Politico, but only based on the merits. It's, when people talk about bias in regards to us, it makes no sense at all. We're very clear about our perspective. We call it the Young Turks home of progressives, but we are not biased against Politico. If they have a good title, we go, hey, great, that's a great title, that's a fair title. We appreciate it.
And I'm not.
Why would in The Atlantic, why would I be biased against The Atlantic? They have interesting intellectual articles. They had some great writers in the past. But the only reason why we get annoyed is when they do hatchet jobs, like the one we're about to break apart for you in a second.
Right, and look, op-ed pieces are supposed to have a take. Usually it needs to be somewhat provocative to get some readers, but all I would ask is, let's balance that out with a different opinion.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
So if you say, hey, Cenk, aren't they allowed to have opinions? Of course they are. But it's not in the case of the editorial, it's not the fault of the writer. If you can't, go one step in Washington D.C. without finding someone who would write an op-ed against Bernie Sanders, right? But they always claim to be neutral and balanced in every other regard. But when it comes to progressives, they're like, I don't know, man. I couldn't find anybody to write an article in favor of Bernie Sanders, so I wrote 13 in a row against them. Or I allowed 13 op-eds in a row against them. But to me, more important ones are the straight news, theoretically straight, objective news ones. And that brings us to Edward Isaac Doveray's article, the one that said, as Bernie Sanders leans into socialism, his rivals laugh.
Yes, so we're gonna get to that in a second. But before we pick it apart and give you examples of questionable, secret, like he puts opinion in there.
100%.
Under the guise of a straight news article. But before we get to that, I just want to show you one clip from Sanders' speech from yesterday. Take a look.
President Trump and his fellow oligarchs attack us for our support of democratic socialism. They don't really oppose all forms of socialism. They may hate democratic socialism because it benefits working people, but they absolutely love corporate socialism that enriches Trump and other billionaires.
So that was not mentioned, right? Like the take on corporate socialism is never written about, or very rarely written about in the mainstream media, which drives me crazy, because while the fear-mongering certainly exists when it comes to government safety net programs that would benefit the poor or benefit working people, You never hear about the mainstream media going after these massive oil subsidies. You never hear about how Walmart or some of these major corporations pay wages that are so low that us as taxpayers have to subsidize them by through welfare programs for their employees. You never hear about that, which is why it's important for him to bring that issue up. And he also said, when I talk about democratic socialism, it means a vibrant democracy and an economy that works for all, not just the people on top. And I would argue that that is precisely the reason why we see the types of articles that we're about to dissect right now. So let's get to that article. It starts off by discussing Elizabeth Warren's reaction to Bernie Sanders and the whole notion of him giving this speech in the first place. And it's reported that she laughed at it, right?
There's no evidence of that. You're supposed to take Edward Isaac Doveray's word for it, but I don't, because he's a hatchet man and has never written a fair article about Bernie Sanders or progressives. So he does have quotes of hers, and I assume he'd be fired, but with the Atlantic, you never know these days if he made up the quotes. So I assume the quotes are true, and the quotes are totally inoffensive. She said, "I'll have to hear the speech. I'll have to hear the speech." That was her 2 quotes as to the response. So she didn't say anything dismissive or derisive. He just put that in there.
I've noticed, and it happened with Ana Navarro when you were debating her. I've noticed that there's been, I don't know if it's an orchestrated effort, but there has been an effort to pit Bernie Sanders against Elizabeth Warren. And I'm saying beyond, the electoral politics of it all. I'm talking about the gossipy, the gossipy stuff that I'm seeing in the media.
Yeah, well, no, it's not a matter of gossip. The reason there's 2 reasons they do it. One is legitimate. It's an interesting dynamic that there are 2 progressives in the race and they're taking voters away from each other, right? That's true and legitimate. And for some others like Doveray, they're like, perfect. Let me pump up Elizabeth Warren for now, because he actually writes good things about her, right? And so that she can make sure that Bernie Sanders loses to take away support from Bernie Sanders. And I guarantee you this, I will bet any amount of money that if Bernie Sanders is knocked out of the race, the Doverays of the world, the mainstream media will turn around and absolutely go ballistic about Elizabeth Warren. Then all of a sudden the positive coverage will turn to negative coverage and go like, oh, well, you know what, now that we looked at her policy, she's against Wall Street. It's radical, right? So, but while she's taking points away from Bernie Sanders and splitting the progressive vote, they're like, oh, pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, and look, let's keep it real. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are not the same, right? Elizabeth Warren has strong economic policies, but she has a foreign policy record that is not nearly as strong or progressive as Bernie Sanders. So to make it appear as though the 2 are exactly the same is ridiculous. And I think that one of the clear differences between them when it comes to economic policy is that he's more comfortable with the word socialism, right? Whereas she is much more interested in maintaining a capitalistic society that has some reforms. So he wants to go a little further than her, or a lot further than her when it comes to certain things.
Yeah, so look, they're both great candidates. Back to the point of this article. So we don't know if Elizabeth Warren actually laughed at Bernie Sanders. And then another example he used was Kamala Harris. He read the long title of the speech to her and she went, huh? I don't know if, that's her only quote, H-U-H, huh? I don't know if that means, wait, I didn't hear that title, or if that means like, ha, right? But I don't trust Doveray at all, but he used that as a second example of someone laughing at Bernie Sanders. Why? Because he wanted to write an article about how people are laughing at Bernie Sanders.
That's exactly right.
Whether it's true or untrue. Then he quotes 2 people that actually did say negative things about Bernie Sanders, and they're John Delaney and John Hickenlooper. Now, those guys are polling at 0%. At the end of the article, Doveray makes fun of how Bernie Sanders is slipping in the polls. It's true that he's quote unquote slipping in the polls. He slipped all the way to number 2 out of 24. But Doveray doesn't go ha ha about the 2 guys criticizing him, polling at 0%.
Right, and you're right in that he made a point to include as many candidates as possible in this piece who laughed at Bernie Sanders. So I'll give you the examples. Former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who was booed for condemning socialism 2 weeks ago in a speech before the California Democratic Party, laughed at the title of Sanders' speech when I read it to him. Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado let out an exasperated chuckle.
First of all, you got to get glasses. Second of all, so again, it's a lot of interpretation. Dovray's dying to write, ha ha, people are laughing at Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
I got a I'll have to read the speech. I got what I'll interpret as a chuckle. Good enough, I'm writing the article.
There's more.
And to be fair, I didn't mention Michael Bennet. If you add Michael Bennet to Delaney and Hickenlooper, they're still at 0%.
So Michael Bennet also said after his chuckle, I don't think the American people even know what democratic socialism means. Nobody in my town halls talks about the democratic socialism versus oligarchy and authoritarianism.
Okay, well, look, you want to get into an argument whether it's a smart political strategy or not to emphasize that phrase, no problem. That is a legitimate discussion. When you go, nobody knows a democratic socialist anyway, it's like celebrating your ignorance. So if you want to say you're against it, okay, make a case against it, which John Delaney does, and I respect him for that.
Yeah, and by the way, the whole point of his speech was to explain what democratic socialism is.
Yeah, you might have wanted to listen to the speech or watch the speech, but that would actually be doing journalism if you're Dovray. To be fair to the candidates, they're opposed to him. Their position I understand better.
Let me give you some more from the Dovray article. He also says, for years, Sanders has proudly been a democratic socialist who works with the Democrats in the Senate, but he only formally joined the party during his last White House bid. When Sanders ran for re-election to the Senate last year, he appeared on the ballot as an independent and declined the nomination of the Vermont Democratic Party, but still received its support.
So, Ben and I got into a debate, as we love to do on Old School last night, about whether the media is biased against Bernie Sanders or not. I had quickly read the New York Times story about the same speech, and I noticed that it was, again, very slanted against Bernie Sanders. On the other hand, the Washington Post article was actually fair. And so we got into that debate, and Ben read the whole article on the air on Old School, another one of our shows, okay? And we counted 6 different times that the New York Times, in reference to this speech, talked about slipping in the polls, slipping to Elizabeth Warren, going down, failing, slipping in the polls, 6 different times. He gives us a very substantive speech about what does it mean to be a democratic socialist, and how about the juxtaposition to corporate socialism? And New York Times is like, ha ha, Bernie Sanders, ha 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 ha, right? So anyway, but they can't hold a candle to Dovray. So let me give you some of his, some more of his bias that he made very, very clear. When he talked about Bernie Sanders' major address, he put major address in quote marks.
Yeah.
Why is that in quote marks? Like Bernie Sanders could give a major address. I mean, why don't you just say, I hate the guy? And is there any editors at the Atlantic? Yeah, of course, the ones that allow every op-ed to be against Bernie Sanders. So when you see the scare quotes on major address, shouldn't you ask your so-called objective reporter, why did you do that? It seems like you're mocking him. He's running second in the race out of 24. So if you're taking the guys running at 0% incredibly seriously, you're quoting them all over your piece, shouldn't you take a major address by this guy running in second seriously? And you obviously didn't.
And I like that you mentioned those quotation marks, because when straight news reporters inject their opinion into the articles that they're writing, which they're not supposed to do, they find subtle ways to do it. And another example that quotation mark part of his article reminded me of was when the New York Times wrote about Bernie Sanders and essentially made fun of his accent. Right? So it's like little subtle things of either belittling him, minimizing the influence he has, or just straight up mocking him, right?
Yeah.
And I have one other example that I want to read, Cenk, because this really stood out to me. He writes, some Democrats believe he contributed to Hillary Clinton's eventual loss to Trump because he tore her down on a mission to change the party from the outside, and they still hold that against him. So the whole some Democrats thing, I think, is another way of injecting your opinion rather than just quoting the specific individuals that you're referring to.
So that's a great point, Anna, because normally, so this reporter, he's on a mission, right? So he goes and tries to get quotes from people who don't like Bernie Sanders. He goes to his opponents, Democratic strategists.
Jeff Weaver was the only positive person toward Bernie Sanders.
Right, but when he can't find a negative quote, he goes, screw it, I'll just say some Democrats. And maybe he's referring to himself. But then he went and said his opponent's critiques are like this. Now that's another disguise for, here's what I don't like about Bernie Sanders. I'll put it in the guise of his opponent's critiques. Sanders is promising pipe dreams that most people don't even really want. Wait, did any of his opponents actually use the word pipe dreams? No, you used pipe dreams, right? And certainly won't get. That appears to be another opinion from this objective reporter. And along the way, he's playing right into Trump's Democrats or socialist scare tactics. So every single thing is framed against him. But then on two issues, he just couldn't help but actually give his opinion. He says at one point in a line, Sanders and his aides see this as a moment to reach for the revolution that he's been dreaming of since he was an angry, underemployed writer in the 1970s. What the hell is that? I mean, there's no evidence that he was angry in the 1970s. I actually believe it or not, because we're knee deep in politics, have read the stories about Bernie Sanders in the 1990s, 80s, and 70s. And he once lived in a house in Vermont that had no wooden floor, and he had to struggle. He was a carpenter, etc. But there's no indication that he was angry.
He was a carpenter?
Yeah, he was a Jewish carpenter.
It's kind of badass.
I think a lot of people in this country would want their boss to be a Jewish carpenter. Anyway, so another hatchet job in the last line from Dovere is, he'd probably be happier though if his campaign were catching on a little bit more than it is, with or without his speech.
So
he's in second place. He's in second place. How about, Hickenlooper and Delaney and all these guys are very important people that I quoted. They're in 23rd place. They're in 17th place. The guy's in second place. Of course he's not happy. He's an angry man because he's fallen all the way to number 2 out of 24. God damn it, man. You have a perspective and you lie about it. You lie about it and pretending to be an objective reporter.
Exactly. If you come out and you just admit that you're not objective, that you don't like Bernie Sanders as a candidate, okay, at least we know. But the thing that's so frustrating is how we keep seeing what's supposed to be straight news reporting pushed upon the American people as if it's objective and it has absolutely no take or perspective. It has a perspective. It's much more subtle than an op-ed, but it has a perspective. And by the time you're done reading it, think about it this way. When you're done reading this piece, if you're an American who's not really into politics and you're just trying to educate yourself on the candidates, how do you feel about Bernie Sanders after you read this piece? Do you think he's a clown? You're likely to think he's a clown because you've just heard from all of these people who are allegedly laughing at him.
Yeah, and by the way, did you get a fair chance to figure out if the speech was good or not? No, because he hardly quoted it.
He didn't really quote it at all.
Yeah, and even if he wrote it ahead of time, they gave the quote that we showed you in the video to the press ahead of time.
Right.
And Dovere's like, I'm not gonna be fair to this speech. I'm just gonna make fun of him. And no one rigs an election better than the media. And so they can't go and fix the votes, but they can give hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in free media coverage that is either positive to people like Buttigieg or negative to people like Sanders. They can fix it way better than the DNC, way better than the Russians. It has a much, much bigger impact. And the last thing is, people talk about white privilege. Well, there's mainstream media privilege. They say my pro-status quo perspective is so obviously correct that it's not even a perspective. It's just a reality. Everybody should be in favor of the establishment. Everybody should be in favor of the status quo. Anyone who wants to change the status quo is a radical fringe person. And you see how objective I am. No, you have privileged your own perspective in a way that is actually more biased than anything else in the world. Did you know that by watching this video or buying something off of Amazon or doing anything else on the internet, someone is building a profile on you? Now, we've told you about NordVPN a lot of times, but remember, just simply head over to nordvpn.com/TYT to keep yourself protected from prying eyes. Use the code TYT to get 75% off and an extra month of NordVPN for free.